Could you share a story or two of what it looks like for someone to get here
Yep.
from wherever in the world?
Well, I will. A couple of stories come to mind,
Because you're not
and
flying first class on
no,
Delta.
well, I mean, and the whole process there. So now I will readily tell you here, and I'll pull the card out of my wallet if you want me to. I am a card-carrying member of the Grown Man Crybaby Club. So when something hits my heart, it happens. So I'm just going to warn you ahead of it. But there is, all kidding aside, there's a young lady from Africa that petite girl. I mean, maybe a buck 10 on her days when she packs all her winter clothes on her. I mean, she's a petite young girl, and found out that the military was coming and grabbing all the teenage girls and conscripting them into the military from her area, and she knew that that didn't always end well for the girls in there because it wasn't always to carry a gun.
Right.
And so she and some of her friends were started hiding, but knew they couldn't hide successfully for very long. And so they decide they need to flee. And so their path to flee to get to Egypt, which is where they were headed, was across a desert that in normal conditions on foot would be a 3-week trek across the desert. Because they were not wanting to get caught, they traveled only at night, and then they had to find places along the way to hide. So it ended up being a 3-month trek. And so she gets to Egypt and applies with the UNHCR. But in that time, they didn't have finding work as someone coming in like that doesn't happen very easily. So no money to speak of, and so just living in in not the best of circumstances. And then 7 years later, she gets permission to travel over here. So so we asked her the question as she arrived. We said, just curious, what's the first thing you did when you got here? And she said, I went for a walk because I wanted to know what freedom felt like. And it's like when you have that conversation with somebody who at age 24 did not have a moment in their life of ever feeling free.
Right.
And, and she said, I went for a walk because I wanted to know what it felt like. And, it just, if that doesn't hit you a little bit right there. And then one other story, a family that fled their city in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they fled to Uganda, and they're in a refugee camp of 100,000 people in a camp, all a tent city, a massive tent city. And one corner of the camp was where the office was when they needed to check in or go through a vetting appointment, or, in that 2 to 3 year vetting process. If they ask you questions on, year 1, and you ask the same questions in year 3 and you get different answers, you're not vetted. You're done. It is. But then once you're through with the vetting process, every couple of months, they would post on the bulletin board outside the office, they would post the list of all the people who just got permission to travel. And so word would spread through this 100,000 people in there, and they would crowd around the office to see if their name was on it this time. And of course, most of them would turn away. I mean, there might be 400 or 500 names on there from 100,000 people.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like they're just pushing and shoving to get to the front to see if this is the time my name is on that. And so you talk about hope deferred. You mean, you've got that hope. Is it going to be this time? Is it going to be this time? And then it's not there. Right. And so then you find out a couple months later, they post it again. And so you rush up there again. How about this time? How about this time? 17 years he waited, checking every couple of months, looking for his name. And, and he even had gotten to the place where he wasn't even wanting to go check anymore.
Sure.
And so, and that day that he found out his name was finally on there, he and his wife had 6 kids. All 6 of them were born in that refugee camp. And so now it's permission to travel. And it's like, he doesn't even know what to do with himself.
Right.
I mean, but I just, as I try to put myself in the shoes of these stories that you hear, I can't imagine pinning your hopes on a name being on a bulletin board and 17 years of looking for that before you find it. The stories like that, as we hear them, are the ones that just, and even then, coming over here is a huge opportunity for them now. But they got one of their oldest was a high school age wise was a high school freshman. His education was in the camp and is minimal at best. He learned a few English words, but he barely wrote his own home language, and he gets put into a high school based on his age. Well, how are you going to take beginner level algebra in ninth grade when you never learned math?
Right.
And so, I mean, it's like and so even though for the family, now they're over here and they're safe and it's a good place for them and they're thrilled to be here, it doesn't mean it's easy.
It just gets started.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like and I don't know a better word, but it's like a purgatory. Like you sit in this camp for so long, just waiting for something else, and now it's like, okay, now life can start because everything is frozen in time there.
Exactly.
You're not traveling. There's no vacations. This is just where you are. Yeah. You can't go home.
Yeah, and the perspective of that too, when you look at and when the kids come over here, even the ones that had the privilege of learning some English. Everything is survival mode. So it's about that day. Okay, I got to make it through another day. I got to make it through another day. So there's no dreaming about the future.
Right.
I mean, you ask somebody here, what's your 5-year goal? What's your 10-year goal? Where do you want to be? And, so when an American meets one of these families and they've got their kids, they do the thing you do. What do you want to be when you grow up? They've never thought about it. They didn't know they had choices.
Sure.
And so it's like they usually will answer just what they think is cool, a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman. But, I mean, those, the doctor and the lawyer's not available to them when they don't, when they're going to be lucky to graduate high school.
Right.
And but they've never had the opportunity to even think about a future.